Good morning, everybody. Good morning, good morning. I hope your breakfast was great. All locally sourced ingredients, top quality, so I hope you really enjoyed that. My name's Jerry Black and I'm the Chief Executive of the Chamber. It's a real pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today. We've got to know Paul Chapman over the last 6 to 9 months really well. And he's been a real shot in the arm for all of us in terms of understanding this project and why it's so important to Birmingham. And Paul will, I think, delight you really in terms of understanding the scope of this project. It is so much more than just a railway line. As important as a railway line is to us, and the current one's filling up, we've got to replace it because we're at the heart of the country. It's about one of our main assets really is our geographic position in the UK. So, you know, if transport doesn't work for Birmingham, it doesn't work for the country either. It's about jobs, you'll hear about that, it's about growth, but really what it's about is what it inspires in your minds as business people. What's the next 30 years going to look like for Birmingham when we have this sort of infrastructure in place? And the answer actually lies within ourselves. Paul's got a few clues, but the answer will come from businesses locally saying, I get it now, I see what I can be doing over the next long-term horizon. You know, it gives us the chance to revisit our industrial base. We've seen a hollowing out of manufacturing over recent years. It's coming back now. But when you see the scale and the scope of this project, you start to see the transformational potential of a project of this size. It's Europe's largest infrastructure. High Speed 2 Limited have joined the Chamber as a patron member. We thought that was rather useful, given it's Europe's largest project. Better to work as closely as we can with colleagues from High Speed 2 Limited, and where we can work together to make the most of the project. So I'm really looking forward to hearing the discussion, and then we'll have a chat after Paul's talked about it. So could you give a very warm welcome to Paul Chapman of High Speed 2.
Thank you, Jerry. I'm not sure I can live up to that billing. It's tough. But I was up in Tamworth on Friday, and I have to say that this story is starting to work because we met with the Chamber up in Tamworth, probably 15 businesses over lunch, and you know, Tamworth gets a tough deal in some ways out of High Speed 2 as a little area. It gets lots of stuff going through it. But the businesses started to understand why it's necessary and what the wider benefits are. And I've had 4 or 5 emails since then from people who were at that lunch saying, thank you, we got it. And there's one particular lady I won't name whose business has been affected. And she actually left saying, okay, I realise now that you're trying your best to help me as a business, but actually this is for the greater good. Now, that's part of the battle as a comms director that we have to win, to find out either through research or just coming to events like this. I mean, Jerry knows and reminded me over breakfast, this is I think my 5th or 6th trip to Birmingham in the last 5 weeks. Well, why is that? It's because we have a really good dialogue up here and we start to learn. So every time you speak, you learn something and you put that back in the machine and you refine. And hopefully the messaging gets closer to what people can understand, not just businesses, but the public. We've referenced that place up the road, as it's generally known here. I am up in Manchester this evening speaking. Interestingly, we have not become members of the Chamber up there. In fact, we haven't been asked. To use this chance to get Birmingham back to being the second city. You know, this could be the catalyst. And over breakfast I was saying to Jerry, there's some good stuff going on at ground level, but what are the 3 things that Birmingham wants? Not necessarily deliverables from HS2, but what does it want the city to look like in 10 or 15 years? How is it going to use this massive investment? Is it about showing off the multicultural harmony that there is in Birmingham that drives, when you drive around the city? I had a very nice curry last night courtesy of Raj, which is always a pleasure in Birmingham, but yeah, that's a hackneyed bit. But actually, wherever you look in Birmingham, there's new things happening. You know, Raj was telling me that, about a Somali community moving into an area that was really quite derelict. Everyone went, what's happening there? And now it's becoming more thriving. So Birmingham's bloody good at regenerating itself. It's not necessarily good at capturing that into 2 or 3 points and telling everybody else. And I think that's the challenge for Birmingham. I've been talking to Sir Albert about it. I'm seeing Neil Ramey at lunchtime. The basics are there, but what is it that business and the public sector in Birmingham want their investment and work with HS2 to stand for? Because that's what transforms it away from just being a railway into, this is a great moment for Birmingham to step forward. Jerry was telling me the other day about and I knew anyway what happened around when Rover Group went down and everybody came together historic divides were chucked away, and it was all about doing the right thing for the city. So, yeah, maybe in the turmoil that's happening, Fraser Nelson wrote a particularly pithy piece the other day, but then he's an arch Tory and he was calling on the Tories who had lost power in the council to really pull their weight and do it again. But that's a bit of naked politicking. But it is a moment for Birmingham to say, stop knocking us, we're actually pretty good, but maybe you just need a catalyst to do that. So, back into the real stuff. Party political's over. I don't do politics, I have no political affiliation, I just work with the leaders in the cities to try and help them do more. We have, if I get the technology right, just a short intro to give you a feel for what we're trying to stir with HS2.
Great Britain invented the railways. In 1825, the first public railway opened between Stockton and Darlington. That 12-mile journey took just 2 hours, and the industrialists could see the future. Within a few years, the great cities of the North and Midlands were connected by the expanding rail network. Trade and jobs flourished, and the railways quickly became the nation's arteries, fueling not only transport and travel, but economic growth and innovation. The railways became the ultimate expression of our industrial prowess. Today, we have one of the busiest networks in Europe. Last year, there were 1.5 billion journeys made in this country. And in the coming years, the demand for rail travel will continue to grow, putting ever more pressure on the network our predecessors built. And over the last decade, we've quietly been doing extraordinary things in this country. We built HS1 to form a high-speed link to Europe and transformed St Pancras and King's Cross to make world-class stations. We created the Olympic Park and put Stratford on the world map. And we're building Crossrail, the biggest infrastructure project in Europe. And now HS2 will be our next great engineering feat, one that will define the 21st century. Here in Birmingham, there'll be a station at Curzon Street and a new interchange for Birmingham Airport. That new connectivity will underpin the ongoing regeneration of the whole of the West Midlands. And with projects like the UK Central Scheme in Solihull, has the potential to create over 100,000 jobs across the area. We'll build a new network connecting cities and businesses across the UK, creating jobs and opportunities, just as the Victorians did.
So just in case you think this is a load of hype and a comms director doing his selling job in front of you, I should probably also explain that I had 6 years at High Speed 1 as a managing director and took that from the end of construction into operation and then through the sale to the Canadian pension funds, and 3 years at Olympic Bid before that, so I do know a little bit about transport and big projects as well. So when we come to Q&A, I don't mind being grilled in any direction you want. I'll try and get through this in 15-20 minutes so that we've got plenty of time for conversation, because as I said earlier, that helps me to learn, because every time I come there's a few regulars in the audience, but there's people I haven't seen before, so I will no doubt pick things up that otherwise I wouldn't get. So, is that going to work? No. So I'm going to talk briefly about what's the need for High Speed 2, what's actually going on there, why do we need to do the work we're doing, what opportunity does it create, and then what could the transformation be that comes out the back end of it. And the what bit is where it really matters for Birmingham, because it can be what you want to make it. We bring the infrastructure, government's investing the 42 billion, including 14 billion of contingency, we'll come back to that. But what you want it to be is what you put forward, and I've got 1 or 2 slides that Richard kindly gave me from Centro that keep it with a bit of West Midlands locus. So we have been in the news. It's always busy, there isn't a day when it isn't busy, although thankfully the last 3 weekends have been quiet. Last 3 weekends we've not seen the big Sunday stories. And we have one from Gilligan, and fair play to him, he's a good researcher and he writes good stuff. But things are settling down a bit. So as we went through the summer, we made a conscious decision to make sure we secured funding for phase 1 of the project. With that came some jiggery-pokery with Treasury and their desire to have us at a 95% confidence level, which triggered the stories of 10 billion cost bus. The vast majority of that, the truth is there was about 2 billion of cost growth. The vast majority of that was the contingency that Treasury wanted to put around it, so there was a dedicated funding envelope so that if we did have a problem in the future, we weren't having to rob money out of other projects. difficult story to sell to the public, virtually impossible. But actually the real benefit for business is that we've secured 17.16 billion of funding for phase one. That's in the spending review, it's published, it's not a conditional thing, the money's there. So the job now is to get cracking on with the bill through Parliament so we can actually start spending that money. And probably most people don't realise this, but we're just about to start spending a significant amount. So next late spring, we go into the field and start spending money on ground investigation works. That's £60 million worth of ground investigation works that are out to tender now. Now that's actually bigger than most civil engineering projects in this country. So if you want to feel for the scale of the project and what it can do for construction business and much wider businesses, that's where it begins. So back to Friday in Tamworth, what helped to win those people over? When you start to explain that when you put 60 million into a reasonably tight geographical area between London and Birmingham, and that's all about ground investigation works and drilling. The people that do that work, they come and stay in the communities for a period of months. They want somewhere to live, they need to eat somewhere, they buy their sandwiches, they go to the pub. That all puts money straight into local economies very, very quickly. It doesn't just go into the construction supply chain and get trapped there. It actually bleeds out because these people are doing work in the field. So there'll be some interesting stuff that we'll study and capture even as early as next spring. It's not just about 2026, that's part of our challenge, is to keep talking to businesses and show them how early this comes through. And I guess politicians are getting that because, I was reading my cuts this morning before I came down here. It's a habit of 6 o'clock in the morning, unfortunately, as comms director, and there's a bit of coverage about the two heads in Labour having a little war. But we've now got Labour leadership and Shadow Transport Secretary very clear that they support the project. They're doing a bit of manoeuvring pre-2015 elections, but that's what we'd expect. We've got the Chancellor, the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, and then as you come down through the organisations, Mike Rake, who's just gone to CBI as President, has made his position clear. The Chambers have been hugely supportive at national and local level. For some reason the IOD are in a strange place, but that's up to them. They may come around. I certainly know that their Midlands and North West members are lobbying their London-centric piece very hard. They did a survey earlier in the year. When you look inside that, it's 3% of their membership, and we haven't yet been able to get them to tell us how many of those were in the South East compared to the rest of the country, but we have a suspicion. But, this thing has got support, and it's got union support. So we've always had strong support from the unions. It's one of the sort of quirks of HS2. And as recently as Monday in The Guardian, for those of you that read all the different papers, there was a really good letter from 3 big union leaders saying, this is why you need to do it. Basically back to Balls and Miliband, do not give up now, it's important. And we've seen Albert Bohr here stand up, we've seen Richard Leese stand up in Manchester and be very clear about why this long-term investment is vital if we're going to sort out what's going on in the Midlands and the North. So why do they get it as politicians? What's important about it, and why should it be important to you as businesses? What this graphic shows is the blue is where we were with GDP per head in 97 and the orange is where we are today. So if you look, there was a gap between the greater South East, that's a lovely term for economists, isn't it? And the rest of the country in 97, it was about £4,000 a head. There's a yawning chasm now, that gap has doubled. So in 2011, there's a if I can count properly, yes, a £9,000 gap per head in GDP. So basically the South East has kept motoring and the rest of the country hasn't stagnated, but it's not motored as fast. So if you have the privilege of listening to Chancellor talk about this, he describes it as, he looks at the UK as a business where one division, the South East, is motoring and delivering super profit, and the other, say 2 or 3 divisions in the regions are probably loss making. And he will use the analogy, you can't run a business where one bit's super performing, the other bits are loss making. You have to invest in the loss making bit. So if you want to get what's going on at the very top level and why they want to do this, they know that there's a limited time, whether it's social reasons or economic reasons, where you can have one part of all the heat in one part of the country and the rest doing all right, but not catching up in any way, shape or form. And that comes down to social fabric, it comes down to cohesion, it comes just down to businesses. So it's about investing to bring those other parts of the business of the UK, if you think in those terms, forward. And then we get into a bit of trouble and people try and tell us that we're draining the money from the rest of the country or certainly from the rest of infrastructure. And the PM's been really forthright about this recently. Again, in the cuts this morning, he was doing stuff down in Cornwall. But long before HS2 comes along, there's 37 billion going to be spent in railway schemes. Road budget being tripled, yes, most of that comes after 2015, but it's a commitment there, and there's no sign of Labour at the minute wanting to change that. But more importantly, by 2021, every single congestion relief scheme in the Highways Agency books, whether it's managed motorways, junction improvements, is scheduled to have been delivered. And I think that will happen because my colleagues over in the HA have got a new collaboration agenda running. We're doing something quite similar. There were some announcements. The PM was in Carillion in Wolverhampton the other week, announcing more spend, but also announcing they'd save 20% on the last managed motorway scheme. So if HA can take 20% out of the cost of capital delivery, then their chances of delivering all these schemes is pretty damn good, actually. And it gives us a lot of confidence that we can deliver under the budgets we've been set. So there are some interesting dots we're starting to join up that perhaps haven't been joined up before. So why do we need this? Well, long distance rail travel has doubled. And by mid-2020s, Network Rail saying West Coast Main Line is full. We've made that case. You can see it out there in the papers. What caught the journalists by surprise is they understood that Euston was very crowded in the mornings because some of them go through there, when they venture north of London. What they hadn't understood, there's the same thing is happening in Birmingham and Manchester and Leeds. And actually, I would argue if you go to Manchester Piccadilly of a morning, it's more crowded actually than Euston is because it's very, very intense. Chatting to somebody over dinner the other night, they happened to come from Leeds. They were telling me, and I hadn't seen it in the first thing in the morning, but there are just loads and loads of people standing on all the commuter services into Leeds. And then if you think about all the people who are sat on the M1 in a jam, basically commuting from Sheffield to Leeds or coming down into Leeds from the north or coming across from Manchester, you understand why this capacity issue is quite real, because eventually they'll get bored with that commuting or people won't be able to access labour pool into their business. So why do we need to keep pushing this so hard? There's actually something we haven't worked on anywhere near enough yet, but it's the freight angle. So at the moment, there's a lack of capacity for freight on the railways. My freight colleagues bend ears on a regular basis about how can they get a path. And if you take away the traditional head banging between Network Rail and the freight industry and actually get into a more modern world, there still aren't any paths. So, Network Rail has recently turned away passenger services from Shrewsbury and Blackpool because it can't accept them on the West Coast. The absolute truth is you could probably squeeze them in, but if you did, you'd probably go to punctuality levels below 70% and lose control of the railway because it's so full that if you squeezed another path in, if there's any kind of disruption, the knock-on effects are enormous. So if, like me, you travel up and down regularly and had the joys of the wires being down at Watford the other week, 3 days of absolute chaos, people standing on trains everywhere, even more than usual. That's just one event. And also that's one event with the current population. So the other factor in this is that the population's due to grow by about 10 million. And nobody seems to be arguing that isn't the case. I haven't seen any statisticians say, no, that's not right. So where are those people going to go? And this is an uncomfortable choice for people in the Chilterns and other places. And it's one of the reasons why people like CPRE are becoming increasingly supportive and campaign for better transport. I'm expecting to say some nice things in the near future. Because if those people don't congregate in the cities or close to the cities, they're in the countryside. So then we're building houses all over the green belt that we're not meant to trash. And if they're in the cities, then they need to be able to move about either within the city, local connectivity, or from city to city to access job market. So the crowding we see today is only a microcosm of what it might be like in 10 years' time when you put another 10 million people into the transport system who are naturally going to congregate where the transport is already at its most crowded. And back to the earlier thing, if they all go in the southeast, then we're in big trouble, real big trouble. There's no water, there's no space for housing, transport system's knackered. Energy's a problem in the southeast because it's the furthest away from our generating stations. There's another little hidden thing that goes on. And people, less and less actually, but back in the summer were saying, particularly those who weren't quite sure of the need or perhaps quite validly had an ideological objection to the high-speed rail, and we're quite happy with the debate. We don't mind it, but we just like to have the facts there. So people were saying, just invest in broadband. Well, great, but look what broadband does. Huh? This is a graph along the bottom of the way that digital stuff has developed back from 1995 through to today, whether that's Facebook, social media. And look what's happened to passenger travel on rail in that time. It's absolutely shot up. Absolutely rocketed. Now, why is that? It's reasonably simple. Stephen Gleave is one of our ambassadors, so I have to confess that's a friendly quote, but it's true. People are humans. When we do business, we quite often make introductions to each other through email, and what's the very next thing we do? We arrange to go and meet someone, because you actually want to see what they look like, and do they really agree with you, or are they just bluffing on email? And if you go a bit further in the business world, if you're doing a deal, you might start the deal off over email, but sure as hell you go face to face to close it. And there's some fascinating stuff if you look inside Eurostar's business model, where its business carryings directly mirror the mergers and acquisitions activity between London and Europe. Because all of the accountants, all of the financial advisors, just the management teams, need to interact and come together in any deal you do. And it's the same in any kind of business. Whatever trade you do, yes, there's lots that you can do on the internet, but I bet if you've got an internet and an e-commerce side, you go and visit your suppliers to quality check them, to see what the product is, to meet the management team, before you then get into an e-commerce position. So we would say, and we'd hope somebody might commission some more like detailed research of what's that correlation between internet connectivity and travel, because we think it's quite stark. Matt Hancock, the skills minister, is doing some stuff at Core Cities Summit later this week, and he'll be talking about it's not either broadband or HS2, it's both. Yeah, we should be investing in 4G, we should be investing in rolling out broadband to rural communities, but actually if they then want to travel, we've got to give them the means to do so. Otherwise we end up clogging up, Patrick, the Secretary of State, uses the line, clogging up the arteries. We end up clogging up the nation's systems and people can't move around, and that sucks the lifeblood out of any growth initiatives. So what does it mean in the West Midlands? It means quite a lot, actually, and I caught myself by surprise, and Richard, I confess I hadn't read this as well as I should have done in the past until I was Q&A'd up in Tamworth. In our strategic business case that we published 2 weeks ago now, the demand forecast is based on a growth rate of 2.2%. Very conservative. The historic rate for the last 10 years in the rail industry has been 5%, and that's ORR, published data. It's not us making it up to sell our case. Interestingly, and this caught my eye big time on Friday, and as I say, I'm sorry, Richard, I should have really thought about it before. 14% was the growth in the West Midlands. So we're saying that at 2.2% growth, you've basically got one person standing for every two people seated by 2030. And in London, you've got, on the London-Birmingham leg, you've actually got two people standing for every two seats. So it's what we call a 200% crowding factor. That's at 2%. If you move it up at 5%, it's worse. But actually, the reality of life is in the West Midlands, you've had 14% growth in the last year and a 32% increase predicted by 2019-20. Well, that's massive. That's absolutely massive. And the reality of that is, in the short term, people just cannot get on the services. If you don't provide the new capacity, the knock-on is, and Sir Albert was very clear on this a few weeks ago, government will put more and more priority on the long-distance trains, and the commuter services that come into Birmingham will get forced off the network. So if you live in Lichfield or Tamworth and you work in Birmingham, you're in the car, thank you very much. So what does that do to an already congested city? So there is a direct local impact about this capacity relief, because you put it the other way around and you build HS2 and you have the release capacity, that creates a huge amount of space on the network once you move the Virgin trains off for more commuter or interregional services. And that's one of the big drivers, we think, that connectivity piece of growth. I guess if, let's just hypothesise, if by then we've had devolution of rail franchises to the West Midlands and the North, and there's a lot of people very interested in that, and also in my past I wrote a chunk of the Brown Review around Christmas around refranchising, and we had quite a good look at that devolution, and I can see why core cities are pushing for it. I think they probably are better placed to specify the services in regions than government, because I think they understand what the regions need better than government, but that's another day's debate and I shouldn't be quoted on it. But I think there's something to be done there. So what's the benefit to West Midlands? Well, Centro had KPMG do some work outside of the work that we had KPMG doing, which I'll talk about in a minute, on the wider benefits. So it's talking about 51,000 additional jobs and 4.1 billion GVA benefits. That's really, really significant. This is not a small thing for the West Midlands area as a whole. This is a big thing. And if you look at, off the back of that, what Solihull are trying to do through UK Central, they're talking about creating 100,000 jobs over the long term using the new transport connectivity at the airport interchange and other things they want to do. This is probably one of the biggest things. If you keep doing what you're doing really well about attracting manufacturing in, and then you put this connectivity next to it, then firms are going to want to move. And that's kind of happening now. So we had contact from a major international bank who's looking to move 3,000 people up here to Birmingham. What could we tell them about what life would be like around HS2 and after HS2, so they could tell their employees, because they wanted to convince them it was the right thing to do to move to Birmingham. So that, this isn't some pipe dream. Major businesses are already looking at that connectivity because they're making planning decisions 10 and 15 years out on their real estate about where they should move to. And if you want the frightening bit, Manchester, Leeds and Sheffield will be competing against you to get those businesses up there. So Leeds and Sheffield have made a historic step forward, and their inward investment agencies, Creative Sheffield and Leeds and Partners, are working together now around HS2. We had a very interesting conversation. I was chatting to the Leeds end of it, was going to see Sheffield later in the day, and the Leeds end happened to say, oh yeah, I'm off with Ed into the States next week, we're going together to promote Yorkshire. And I just looked at them and said, well, why the bloody hell don't you do it for UK inward investment, in the UK? And suddenly the light bulb went on. So other people, it's not just about you and the city up the road that we don't talk about, but other people are also racing in this game because they've seen it and they understand the chance. So what's the opportunity? Well, we serve 1 in 5 of the UK's population, so people might say because it's geography it doesn't serve a lot of the country, but when you think about what's happening in upgrades from Birmingham to Bristol, or Bristol to Birmingham, whichever way you want to read that, the trip, by the time HS2 comes along, the trip will be significantly quicker from Bristol up to Newcastle, etc., via Birmingham. So Birmingham is, in every sense, at the heart of HS2. It's in the middle of our network. It's where our long-term operational base will be. The signalling centre, the control centres will be up at Washwood Heath. That's a significant opportunity for the city, and Sir Albert is sort of chewing a bone, I think, about whether or not he's going to have some kind of centre of excellence up there. We'd like him to. We think it'd be a great place to have an academy, but somebody needs to call for it and get it cracking, not rely on us to do it. We can help, and we were talking about this up at the Skills Show. It's in the middle of everything, so pretty much anyone who wants to go anywhere in the country at some point is going to come through Birmingham if they're using the train, because that's where you sit in the geography. Bit of stats, when we talk about building new capacity and step changes, what does it mean? Well, we moved from having 11,000 seats into Euston in the peak to 35,000 seats, so we are trebling capacity because of the demand stuff I've spoken about. Interestingly, we published demand forecasts in 2010, limit how many graphs you can get in these slides, but we published some forecasts in 2010. The observed levels in 2012 have already outstripped our forecast. So when I go back to saying 2.2 growth rate is conservative, there's actual living proof, because the actual growth is staying close to 5% and it's outstripping our predictions already. So if you want to talk about are the alternatives good alternatives, not really, because they provide about a third of the capacity of high speed 2. So by the time you've built them, we say a Network Rail have calculated 14 years of disruption, you already have to start building HS2 because they're out of capacity. So you spent 3 or 4 billion on patch and mend basis, and that's basically money down the drain, because as soon as you've done them, the growth's already outstripped them. And you're back to what should we do to solve capacity in the country. Now that might be uncomfortable reading for people that wrote the Eddington report that prescribed a whole series of small initiatives with high BCRs. But the reality is you can't deal with the growth with bits and pieces of investment. It just doesn't work. And as well as seats, and this is the real true point, you double the number of trains that you can have down the corridor. So the West Coast at the top of that graph basically shows where we were in 97 before the upgrade. We had 9 paths an hour. Post the West Coast Main Line upgrade, and remember the years of pain and closures and bus trips, we ended up with 13 paths. With a bit of jiggery pokery and some investment in bits of junction work and signalling, you can get to 16 paths, but then that's it, you're capped out. That's the most you can squeeze out of the West Coast. Physically, if you're into fluids and engineering, it's a pipe. You can put stuff in at the top and then you get it out at the bottom, but you can't put more in the pipe than the pipe will hold. So when you get to 16 trains an hour, that's the capacity of the pipe. That's the 4 tracks between London and Birmingham. It's a fact. People will talk about modern signalling systems and ERTMS, decipher for technical people. That's squeezing trains closer together by using intelligent signalling systems, but it's still a pipe. And you might get maybe 18 trains in there, but you're not going to get much more. So the yellow stuff is, or orange as it comes up on here, is what HS2 brings along, and that gives you between London and the West Midlands 30 trains, and that's the big step change. That and the fact that you segregate the traffic so that you've got high-speed rail for people making long-distance journeys and connecting to other local networks, very importantly, and then on the separate track you've got your freight and your commuter services. And that's what provides the opportunity as well for places like Milton Keynes, Northampton, and the suburbs of Birmingham to have more stopping services and more local connectivity. And I think, Richard, that's a point we need to make more locally here, is what does that mean? It actually means that if you're coming up, I'll try and remember the train announcements, Tile Hill, Arden, those places, you could probably double the frequency comfortably. And you won't sit outside Birmingham New Street as I did last night for 20 minutes waiting for a platform. Because it's every train I've caught up recently parks one station short of New Street to wait for a platform. We're always on time until we're nearly there and then we're 20 minutes late. Every single day. I must dig the stats out because I bet they're fascinating. So what about value for money? Lots of debate amongst economists, and we've almost created a new bone for the economists to chew of who can make the best model and which way is right. But using the department's methodology, and I'll come to the point in a minute, we come up with a standard benefit cost ratio of 2.3. So for every pound you invest, you get £2.30 back in the long term. But inside that is that 2.2% growth rate. And worse still, the Treasury rules say we have to cap our demand 6 years after the railway opens. Treasury says you can't predict the future accurately enough, and that's right. You have to put a cap on demand, otherwise it becomes a false position. So that £2.30 says that 6 years after railways opened, there won't be any more demand growth. And do we really believe that an asset that we're building for 120-year design life might last 200 years isn't going to grow in its usage 6 years after it opened? I don't think so. So if you extend that range out to say 10 years or even 20 years, you start to see returns of £2.80 to £4.50 for the pound. And that sensitivity analysis we've published in the business case we put out last week, 2 weeks ago rather now. That's the bit that makes it a proper and good investment and why it's the right long-term investment, because it just keeps giving. And then let's have another interesting conversation. That's the economic benefits directly related to transport. If, as Michael Hestine highlighted the other week, we were to think about having a concession like we have for High Speed 1 and selling the operating rates for 30 years, if you just do an order of magnitude type calculation, HS1 was sold for 2.1 billion for 30 years. You look at the traffic levels on this railway and the level of its investment, you might say it's, I don't know, let's call it 10 billion as a round number. That's what Hestine used. It might be 8, it might be 12, who knows. So we've got economic returns of up to sort of £3, let's say, as an average in the pound for the investment we make. We get a 10 billion shot in the arm of cash back to government within a couple of years of that railway opening. And by the way, you can do that again and again over time. And then I'll show a slide in a minute around the KPMG work that we did that said 15 billion a year of benefits, wider economic benefits to the country coming from connectivity and labour pools coming together over time. Now, you can't count all of those because there's a bit of apples and pears. But even if you took, say, Henry Overman's one of the arch critics of the KPMG work, he says it's nearer 6 to 8 billion a year of benefits. Well, you know what? That's not bad, because that means in 10 years you've accumulated 8 billion of benefits, and these are like-for-like figures. There's not an inflation thing going on in there. And the railway costs you that, how much to build? 50 billion, including rolling stock and contingency. So it's paid for itself in 10 years, and you've had a 10 billion shot in the arm back to the country if you go for a concession model. And in theory, because it's a theoretical economic model, you're driving out £3 in the pound for every pound you invest. That has got to be a good investment decision. But somehow we need to get that across to businesses so that they understand it, and then you can tell your employees or people you meet in the pub about why this is a good thing and it's the right thing. So what's the opportunity? Regional economies, some people have heard me tell this story before, but it helps me because I can picture it in my head. If you've got North Shoring up in Leeds, so you've got all the professional services businesses, you've got advanced manufacturing in Sheffield where you've got Boeing, and you've got a whole host of what used to be called metal bashers, but they're a bit more sophisticated than that. People with £80 million presses punching stuff out for Airbus on a regular basis, shipping stuff around the world. You come down through the East Midlands area and you've got Rolls-Royce and other high-end engineering businesses doing advanced manufacturing, and you get to Birmingham where you guys assemble high-value finished goods. That's really what's going on down here. And you put all of that together in one big pool, and you make all of that labour attractive to each other as a labour market, and then you market it overseas as an entity. You've suddenly got the same as happens in one city in China or happens in the Rhine and the Ruhr Valley. And you create a new economic powerhouse that's actually joined together. You imagine if all those businesses are now only 20 minutes apart from each other in their stops. So it's like getting on the tube in London to go and see somebody to do business with because you might be doing a joint job in China. That's where the connectivity bit. So if you want to know where does that 15 billion of benefits comes from? It comes from joining together the labour pools and making businesses closer to each other. And then we have a big thing going on around skills and education, because this is a chance to make not just jobs for people but careers, because we have a 15-year delivery length, let alone the operating time. If you start now with kids in schools or people in university, when they come out, so they come out for it, let's say it takes 5 years to move somebody through the top end of the school system and university and into industry. If you're working with them through that period, they've then got 10 years of work in front of them. And if we start from today, it's nearly 15 years of work in front of them, when they can build a career. Now that's really important. I was up at the school show only for 2 hours on Friday, but I was motivated, but my team, and there were people from drawn all across the business, engineers. I hate saying this, our 4 apprentices. That's bad, we have to fix that, yeah? We have 4 apprentices, but that's where we are today. But the 4 apprentices that were there, they were mobbed by all the sort of leaving age school kids who wanted to understand how they got an apprenticeship, how could they get into the project, what could it mean for them, because next to, and Crossrail's bloody good and we've learnt a lot from them, but next to us was Crossrail on the stand and they were hard hats and high vis. We deliberately weren't. We had a train simulator for the kids to drive, and we had engineering and technology stuff, because we wanted to show that construction in the modern world, yes, if you want to wear a hard hat and high vis, you can, but actually there's a whole bunch of technology that goes behind it now with BIM, building information modelling, where we actually build the whole railway in a virtual environment and test it before we even go anywhere near a site. And for the school kids, they hadn't connected that construction could be about technology, because computing and stuff is much more interesting for many people than being in a field or doing carpentry, pouring concrete. So suddenly, and it was girls and boys as well, it's a fascinating thing. There was as many girls queuing up to have a go on the train simulator as there were boys, which surprised me totally. Shouldn't do, but it did. So there's something quite, when you've got a 15-year programme, there's something quite interesting you can do with it. This is the map of the KPMG work. We took a severe beating for allegedly withholding information. I'll just point out that there was a map inside that report that showed red dots where all the negatives were. When we released the table under FOI, and we'd have given it to people who didn't need an FOI, just had to ask, should we have published it? Yeah, maybe in hindsight we should have. That's what happens when you make a mistake. But the 15 billion includes all the positives and all the negatives. It's a net figure. And I had a seminal conversation with a big anti-objector via email and Twitter up in Manchester who went, actually I can't argue against that, because they've been publicising all the areas that get negative benefits. By the way, it isn't a negative, that's a less quick growth, but the way the economists measure it comes out as a negative. If you agree with the negatives, you have to agree with the positives, because it's exactly the same methodology that gets you there. And that's a bit inconvenient for some people, but it's the truth. And that's where we need help from businesses who are actually rational to say, okay, we've heard this explained to us, we kind of get it, but there is a story here. And you can't please everyone. And this is just modelling HS2. KPMG wouldn't do it because they're too professional, but I was trying to get them to say what might be the effects if you actually modelled the electrification programme, Network Rail and the Highways Agency investment, and how might that distribute itself around the country. I would say you would probably get a nice even distribution, and pretty much everywhere in the country would see some benefit from the overall transport investment programme. But no one has yet commissioned that bit of research. Maybe the DFT will commission it, and actually we're going to commission more work from KPMG to firm up the model, get better results, get better data in, and take on board some of the criticism for some of the economic professors, because there are things, this is early stage work. Why are we having to do this? We're doing it because the department's own model doesn't allow you to take account, the rules say you will not take account of relocation of businesses and change of land use. Now that's the exact thing that High Speed 2 is there to do. It's the cause of rebalancing. So we have to go out and look for new ways of modelling, because the existing ways were developed for these piecemeal schemes and they just do not cope with major projects of this size. The rules within their models disregard the biggest benefits you get from schemes like this. So there is a very interesting thing happening, whether you're a transport economist or a macroeconomist. I was talking to Mark Pragnell from Capital Economics, who's a well-known sort of commentator on the macro side. And there's a big problem. We're potentially making the wrong choices in the country about where we invest, because we're using modelling that was built for small schemes and that ignores the main benefits of relocation of business and centralisation of economic activity. So that Stephen Dance at Treasury and I were having a fascinating conversation off the back of the supply chain conference here in Birmingham 2 weeks ago about, is it DFT or Treasury's job to actually fix this? Treasury will probably try not to fix it because it means they don't have to spend money, and that's their job, to be fair. But there is an important point for businesses and academic institutions about tackling this issue. So what does it do about jobs? All right, let's get to the real end. You're all in business. This is a bit you should be interested in. This is what usually starts to swing anybody that might be doubting. We're talking about 20,000 jobs a year for over 10 years through construction pipeline. And the West Midlands has got loads and loads and loads of construction businesses based here. Jerry, how much of your sectorisation comes from construction?
Well, that's probably about 8%.
Okay, so it's not a small bit of the economy, and it could be a much bigger bit, especially as you're at the heart of it. So you get two goes. You get a go at phase one and a go at phase two. You're in the best position in the country to take the most out of this in terms of the construction sector. And in its peak, you get to 50,000 jobs when rolling stock's being manufactured for phase two, you're into operation of phase one and stuff's moving on. There's some, I might have got a few more slides than this. I can't remember what I put in yesterday afternoon in a rush, but that's roughly the split. So there's a big chunk of civil engineering, a decent sized piece of tunnelling. So yeah, for businesses like Carillion, I'm trying to think of one or two of the other bursts roughly around here, a few of the other big businesses around here. That's very, very important. Railway systems, so I know of a few people that are in, I suppose Leicester's East Midlands around West Midlands, but in and around this area, that's their core business. And stuff on stations and depots. What gets really interesting is when you start talking to the manufacturers. So picking up on manufacturing in Birmingham, I was with EEF in Bradford, 20 Yorkshire businesses, all MD level for a regional conference. Instant reaction is, what's in it for us? Typical Yorkshire, it took me 15 minutes to even get a conversation going of a sensible shape, but it was good and we had a dialogue. Then it turned out the building we were in, the company made hydraulic systems, Thorite, I think if I remember correctly they're called, and they make them for Wabtec, who make wagons in the UK, and they were tendering for the Tashi plant up in Newton Aycliffe. And then we opened the conversation out a bit more, and you start talking about the fact we're making tunnelling conveyors, you've got JCB, we need earth movers, you've got vent fans, they all have bearings, rollers, all sorts of stuff in them. And 18 out of the 20 engineering businesses, and they're all manufacturers, EF, Engineering Employers Federation, not assemblers, manufacturers, made product that they could see would go somewhere into the supply chain that constructs HS2. And that was a bit of a sort of seminal moment as well. So we have to broaden it out beyond it's a construction job into actually to construct it, we need to make a load of stuff. So if you want the reality of that, there aren't enough drilling rigs in this country to do the ground investigation work we want to do. People are already placing orders for new drilling rigs. I was talking to Blackwell's, the big earth movers. They will need to bring it, they've got a choice. They either buy new earth moving machinery for the size and scale of what we're doing, or they bring stuff in from the world market, from the auction trade. Well, there's an investment choice and there's an opportunity for UK manufacturing to get itself together and think about, can it make it attractive to buy new kit and re-equip fleets rather than just buying stuff off the international auction market for 3 years and then selling it again. There's some really, really interesting things start to happen with projects of this size and duration. So what are we actually doing? We're trying to build the right skills. We're in the middle of a piece of labour forecasting, so you've got the totality of jobs. What we're now doing as an organisation is doing a proper skills audit with industry and looking at where the skills gaps are so that training programmes we develop actually match the gaps, not just a bit of gratuitous training. The education strategy, so right back into primary schools. I was saying to the guys over breakfast, we did some work here in Birmingham with the Birmingham Baccalaureate during the summer. We trialled a 20-hour pilot that went into a number of schools here where people could work through what the issues are, social, environmental, project management at secondary school level of a major project. And that had fantastic take-up. We've been invited, we had loads of people at Skillshare from this area who'd been part of that or who'd heard about the project. We've been invited back into Washwood Academy, 4th of December, to spend a whole day with them, starting to let their kids know about stuff like this, because they're the people that may well benefit directly if you do end up having an academy at Washwood Heath. So we start at ground level now, not in 3 years' time, but now, actually investing in those schools, trying to help them, and that happens up and down the route. We've set a target for industry that we think they should get 2,000 apprenticeships out of this. I reckon that's conservative. 20,000 people, 2,000 apprenticeships with a skills gap. There's a horrible demographic in the construction industry. A lot of the skills are at the older end at the minute, and it's struggling, even in these hard times, to attract youngsters into construction for reasons I've talked about. So actually, I think you get far more than 2,000 apprentices, especially if we apply a little gentle pressure to the construction supply chain. They kind of want to do it. So on our stand at Skillshare, we had the National Skills Academy Railway Engineering, which has been set up in the last year or two to address the skill shortages in the railway industry. And we had the people who were apprentices there talking to school kids. So one of the powers of HS2 is you can join a bunch of dots together. So things that wouldn't naturally come together, so back to that catalyst world. When you've got a long enough program and you're investing enough money, you can cause people to come together to form long-term partnerships. And we've recently joined Business in the Community. One of my personal ambitions would be to get working with them and with the Prince's Trust to get a consistent delivery model for skills development and apprenticeships up and down the line. Because why should we reinvent a wheel when there are bodies out there that do that as their day job and already connected into communities? And we work closely with the core cities. I mean, that's almost become a goes without saying. So we probably spend as much time talking to people like Sir Albert and Sir Richard Leese, John across in Nottingham, Julie Dore in Sheffield, as we do speaking to our sponsors in the DFT, because it's what those people in those cities want to do and how we can help them that makes a difference. Not really what the DFT wants to do. That's the way we have to go through Parliament, and that's where our minister sits, and he's a bloody good minister. But it's connecting with those cities that will get the most out of HS2. Just a snapshot to prove that we don't just talk about it, we actually do it. We had our supply chain conference at the ICC in Birmingham 2 weeks ago now. It was so oversubscribed, we're going to try and run another one probably in Nottingham, I think, in January. But if you keep watching our website, if you're interested, it'll be there. So we had 1,400 individuals registered. We turned away 600. Surprised us, we started off planning for 200 people, then we got a bigger hall, and eventually we had to stop because there was no bigger hall available in Birmingham at that date. But interestingly, 55% of the organisations are actually SMEs. So it's not just talking about reaching down to the supply chain, it's actually happening. And only 51% of them were in construction or civil engineering. So the interest was far wider. I can't remember if I've got the slide here, but 23% of the people that were there, because we had some nice interactive devices, tell us where you've come from, what you do, were actually manufacturing organisations. So people are starting to get it about the wider opportunity. SMEs, actually look at that, the majority were less than 50 million in turnover. The global turnover of the SME is 1.5 billion, so that's not insignificant. But the global turnover of all the organisations that registered come 450 billion. So we're touching a significant part of the UK economy. And if you look back in the recovery stats, as we're going back towards growth, if we're going to keep in growth, it's been construction that's always been holding back the national figures. Construction took the biggest hit. The services sector came back quickest. And construction is slowly but surely coming back, but it's still lagging a long way behind the other sectors. There we go. 3/4 of the organisations are based outside of London. Okay, so this is the start of our journey towards a nice map that Crossrail have, where they map where a Crossrail pound goes across the country. 95% of their spend is trapped inside the UK, it doesn't go outside the UK, it's not Japanese, it's not German. So there might be big joint ventures from Holland and elsewhere and Spain that are tier 1 contractors, but below that they're spending all their money with the UK businesses. So we're in good shape at the minute as far as I can see, and that's why I come to Birmingham, why I go to Manchester. I'm going up to Yorks and Humber region of EF shortly. Henrik has kindly seems to have volunteered me to go down to Plymouth, but I'm actually personally really pleased to do that because it's important that people in Plymouth understand. Look at that bit in the southwest, where's the data? Only 5% of businesses, so we need to work harder down there to show them what the opportunities are, because there's construction businesses and manufacturing businesses down there that could benefit if they start to think that there's something in it for them. I'm not sure. Oh, I've got some pictures. It was a full room, as you can see. You know, that's the ICC. That there wasn't a seat to spare in there. We crammed it, as you can see, to standing. I think I'm going to leave it there, but that's the real bit, yeah? That's 800 people queuing up for an opportunity to get into this supply chain stuff. And in theory, 600 people stood outside the door who couldn't get in. I hope that's helpful.
Obviously, I get the economic impact in the cost of infrastructure and what it will bring into the region and the wider region.
Yeah.
Wasn't completely convinced about what impact the legacy will have of HS2 with regards to people, the movement of people from London to Birmingham,
yeah,
to Manchester, to Leeds, and vice versa, and the flow that will create,
yeah,
and the economic impact that will then have
Yeah. So
And
the
then more importantly, then opening us up to the rest of Europe.
Yeah.
And becoming a major force within.
So let's try and do that in 3 bites. It's certainly that connectivity enables, as I said, the different regions to actually act as one hub, and that starts to create your counterbalance to London, so you can compete with London. But I would say more importantly, if I get the way the businesses work around here right, it means you can actually compete against Frankfurt and other places by making an offer to a client of a whole supply chain, all within 20 minutes of each other, and working together on a regular basis, which you can't do at the minute. It's 2 hours to Leeds from here. That's ridiculous. You can get from London to Brussels in 2 hours, or 2 hours from Birmingham to Leeds. That is just stupid. So there's a piece of long-term legacy. In terms of the long-term balance, the KPMG work is suggesting to us that the North and the Midlands take twice the benefit that London takes from the scheme. So that to us was a key finding, because we were certain this was about rebalancing. But actually that's saying that with that connectivity, if you think the very first stat, where the GDP figures were, what that is saying is that with HS2, the North and the Midlands should be growing at twice the rate that London is and starting to close that £9,000 a head GDP gap. Now, that's the modelling, and modelling is only a potential prediction in the future. So the legacy actually lies in the hands of the Chambers people in this room, because it'll be what you want it to be. Yeah? If you use that new connectivity and you start using that to market yourself in Europe, wouldn't it be interesting, instead of, I've already spoken about how Leeds and Sheffield are joined together with their investment arms. Imagine if Marketing Birmingham was working in conjunction with those guys, and God forbid I doubt you'll ever work in conjunction with Manchester, but it could happen. But if Birmingham seizes that thing of being at the heart of the country and connected to all the other important parts of the country, London and the other manufacturing regions, then I think you've got something to go and sell abroad. That should be what causes Chinese businesses to want to come and locate here, or want to do. So Birmingham Airport is the biggest export carriers. So if you look at the data in terms of where businesses creating exports are, Birmingham Airport serves more than Heathrow, something like 4 times more, because Heathrow is all about financial services and this area is all about manufacturing. So once you do that connectivity bit, people can get to it. And we also connect Heathrow, Birmingham, Manchester airports together. So in terms of people arriving into the country to come and do business in the West Midlands, if they come into Heathrow, they can be up here in 38 minutes, I think it is, something like that. Should know these off by heart, shouldn't I? If they come into Birmingham Airport, they're close to you anyway, but hey, there's a nice super fast train just to whiz them the last 10 minutes of the journey into a brand new station, into Millennium Point. Imagine that, think about that in your head as a journey for somebody who's never been to Birmingham, who you're trying to woo to invest in the city. And if they happen to fly into Manchester because they've got some strange reason to go to that other place, they can be down here in, I think it's 25 or 30 minutes, direct from Manchester Airport Station. So that is where you get your legacy from.
You've said a little bit about the education business agenda and opportunities and so on.
Yep.
Can you think of any more concrete examples of how we can get schools engaged? Because I think at the moment an awful lot of teachers are just not aware of the opportunities.
We've got STEM curriculum packs under development for every single sort of age band in the national curriculum. So key stages and upwards. If I remember, my kids' own school reports were key stage 1 and 2 and then upwards. I would think it will be the new year before they're fully formed and we're ready to put them out there. But Scott James Ely is my skills lead back at the base. Jerry, I can give you a card afterwards, but we can join you to that. That's why we were at the skills show, was showing off some of that stuff. So by the skills show next year, we can have bundles for people to take away. One of the things we're doing is changing the way we do engagement. So we've had 26 community forums up phase 1 because we needed fixed points to coordinate, because that's how the parliamentary process works. I'm hoping that spring next year we'll be in a place where we've got some form of travelling exhibition. We've been and looked at Centro's bus that they use, something of that ilk, that will move up and down all the parishes up and down the line, just up and down. But everywhere it stops, that'll be an opportunity for school teachers to bring their kids on board, do interactive stuff with us, and use the packs that we would have already distributed. So we want to be touching all of those people. And there's fascinating stuff happening at the skills show for me. I was standing watching, particularly on the Saturday, which is Parents and Kids Day. So there are parents who are coming who had already made up their mind that HS2 was a bad thing, and the kids weren't letting them off the stand because they were having such a good time and wanted to tell them it was a good thing. Now that you have to be very careful you're not seeing to manipulate anything in there, But that's quite important, is if we put the materials into schools, we know that that will help the kids, but it'll also help our public opinion scores in a sort of slightly more naked public opinion way. But that's you know, that is how you change opinion, by educating people, whether they're young or old. Yeah, it's not about propaganda. It's about providing material that educates people so that they can make their own choice. It's create a level playing field with the right information so people can make a choice. You may go out of this room and say, actually, I didn't like that, I don't agree with it. And that's fine, as long as we get a fair hearing wherever we go.
Just Bengray, Packington Estate, where the interchange station.
You are indeed.
One question I've got is, how does HS2 facilitate the growth government desires around the interchange station? And how will it help deliver the UKC visionary document?
I guess in terms of how will it help, most of all, it creates sort of a central weight and a catalyst. You know, without that interchange, would that scheme actually see that, you know, would Solihull get that scheme off the ground without some other major government investment going into the area? We could debate that all day, but I would hazard a guess that it'll be far easier for people like Anne Brereton and yourselves who are working on UK Central to go to government for what people call additionality, the extra investment, if it's centred around something the government's already investing in. So I think that gets you, that's the first part of the answer. Second part of the answer is, you know, you've seen the drawings, and your organisation have been in a lot of dialogue with the airport and with us as well. So there's a lot of realignment of road systems and things that have to happen to create the interchange station. Now, with a bit of intelligent engagement, and then maybe there needs to be some co-funding in there as well, those road systems can actually facilitate UK Central, not just realign them to get them out of the way of an airport station. So I think that's the second part of it. And the third part of it is, if ultimately UK Central will succeed because it ends up getting some pre-lets because people want to locate there. You know, a scheme of that size is never going to get away as a spec scheme. It's going to happen because somebody wants to be there, and that's your first phase, and then the phases follow on. What's going to make them want to be there? Well, you know, maybe, just maybe, the connectivity that they get into London and out to the rest of the country. You know, BNP Paribas have just relocated into King's Cross and centralising all the London facilities. They went there because it's got the best connectivity in London, not just to the continent where they want to be, but to all the other areas. So once you provide transport connectivity, our research tells us that's an important factor in the choices that business make about where they put their headquarters and their other facilities. So I don't know if that's helpful. Maybe it's what you're already thinking.
Yeah, I think along that line, so I'm just thinking in terms of timescales. You've got HS2 that's obviously charging forward, and works may start 2017, 2018. But to perhaps deliver something bigger, you're sort of talking maybe 30 or 50 year vision. But making sure that the infrastructure that goes into the design of HS2 doesn't sort of preclude any further development.
Absolutely.
They come around that.
Yeah,
and it's just interesting how everybody's working together in terms of.
I think there's a reasonably detailed discussion going on anyway, from everything I hear. The other key thing, and it's fine, we talked about over breakfast rather, was there's a programme board for Birmingham. It's specifically there to tackle, and that's Birmingham as well. It's got Ken Measham in there. It's not a Sir Albert show. We deliberately created it with Solihull and Birmingham in there on equal footing. It's got working groups, and they are there to address exactly the sort of question you've asked, which is, how do we make passive provision for other schemes? How do we make sure we don't stop other schemes proceeding by something we build that's in a key place, that's in the wrong place for them? You know, can we change our design to suit? And I know people like Duncan Sutherland, our non-exec director, has been working with Solihull in the margins around what does that development vehicle like? Because the other question is, you know, there's kind of one take of money from business rates. Who's going to take it, and what are you going to use it for? You're going to use it to stimulate the development of UK Central. You're going to use it for the additional transport provisions around HS2. You're going to have an enterprise zone. So it's not just about the civil engineering of the railway and its transport connectivity. It's actually about that wider economic bit of how are you going to create a delivery structure that's sympathetic to HS2 and UK Central, that has the right treatment of future business rates, because that's probably why funding models are going, to stimulate the whole recovery over 30 to 50 years. So again, that place up the road just did it for its city deal, and it persuaded the Treasury to give it money in the short term in return for the Treasury having a slice. After that money was paid back, then the Treasury gets a bigger than normal slice out of the business rate increase that's predicted. So that's quite interesting. Treasury hates that, and it will definitely tell you it's not a precedent. But Treasury is now thinking about long-term tax take as much as it's thinking about short-term loans, because government money is so cheap at the minute because of where gilt rates are. That's the cheapest way to kickstart funding. but then you have to think about who's going to take the money afterwards if you've got a 50-year horizon. So that's, I don't know if that's helpful to you, but those are some of the things that other people are thinking about how you create this early regeneration effect. The other thing I know is that once you're talking to developers, once the hybrid bill gets past second reading, and definitely once it gets royal assent, so that could be as early as spring 2015, they're saying that gives them enough certainty to start making investment decisions, because they know at that point the railway's going to arrive. And there's a fine balance between them building early and building late, but by preference they'd rather build early, get some prime mover advantage, get a tenant in there at a lower rent, and then get a lift at the first rent review because of the new connectivity that's there. So these are, that's not a hypothesis, that's an observed behaviour from King's Cross and Stratford and other places. Westfield put £1 billion of their own money into Stratford long before the Olympic bid was won, because it had the right conditions for investment. It had transport connectivity, it had a brownfield site and a big catchment area. And if you've got the same at UK Central, then you should be able to make that happen.
Good. I think we're probably going to have to stop there. On that
Thank you.
note. Could you show your appreciation for Paul?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope that's really been useful in terms of absorbing just the scale of the opportunity here. And we, as a chamber, will be coming back to this consistently, as you might expect, to involve you, engage you, to give you the opportunity to make some money out of this investment. This is on our doorstep. We're first out of the tram in the country. If you've enjoyed this breakfast, our next one is on Tuesday the 3rd of December, which we're holding at the Birmingham Rep, and our speaker then will be Sir Albert Ball. So make a note of that one for your diaries. Doubtless this will come up, and amongst lots of other things. So you're welcome to mill around here. You no need to rush away. But once again, thank you very much for coming, and perhaps we can show our thanks for Paul again. Thank you.